You can ask your questions and message me here as we go through the topic and discussion today. And if you watch this on replay, please like and comment. That is, of course, if you liked it. Don't like it if you... And by the way, a liking it means you just give it a thumbs up. I guess that Facebook uses liking and all that. So in YouTube land, you do a thumbs up. That does help, by the way, in a couple of ways. One is that the more likes a video gets, the more opportunities others who might benefit from that information would be able to find it. And so if I don't get likes, then things stay in a relative obscurity. But hey, I do this because I have information to talk about, and I like to chat about it. So anyway, let's talk about dairy foods. Again, excuse me about the voice here. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call on the camera here. Let's see, calling back. Sorry about that. Running an office here, all solo, from my remote location. So dairy foods obviously have been consumed by man for thousands of years, if not longer. There are a number of diets that have been popularized in recent times that have called into question dairy foods. And I'll try to keep it simple here and summarize some of the aspects of it. You know, if we want to talk historically, sorry, my phone never blows up with phone calls. And of course, having done this live stream before, I know that these alerts on the phone will come up in the video. So dairy foods have long been consumed by man, and there's one group of there's an argument made that as human beings, we are not made to be consuming the milk of other animals. The milk of other animals is obviously for the young and babies and calves and such. So the point being that, yeah, as adults, we don't need to consume milk. That is an argument, and I actually agree with a lot of that discussion. The other side of it, of course, is we can look historically that milk and dairy has been an important staple for a lot of people, and there's a lot of good evidence that it provides good nutrition and sustainability for humans. And how do we merge these two kind of competing ideas? Well, then this comes back to probably a generalized problem in our food supply today, and that is that we tend to gravitate towards a very simplistic and a very repetitive diet. And we also have the last 50, 100 years of food industrialization and the over-processing of food to the extent that we have many, many foods that get packaged, they get processed in such a way that they're really not what the original food was. Good case in point is going to be if you go down to most grocery stores and you buy that gallon jug of skim or 1% milk. That is nothing like what came out of that cow or it's going to be in an indoor milking facility. The way those animals are raised, what they're treated with, what they are fed is very different from the natural diet that a cow would have. And then it gets processed and it gets put into a package and put on the store shelf, and then people are consuming that. So there are potential byproducts and toxins that are introduced. There are the antibiotics and growth hormones that can be given to the cows. The unnatural diets of giving them grains, for instance, it creates a nutritional profile of milk it's nothing like what its counterpart would be for cows that are fed grass, that get even hay, at least. Cows are primarily an herbivore. Herbivores eat plants, and so they should be getting fresh plants, not a bunch of grains and seeds and things that aren't really natural to a cow's diet. especially the corn. Corn feeding and finishing of cattle is common, especially for beef cattle, and it provides it gives the meat a bit of a texture and taste and flavor that people are accustomed to. I'm not going to say that a little bit of that corn finishing is a problem or really that bad, but corn, the way it ferments and the amount of carbohydrates that are in there and sugars and the kind of a dysbiotic effect creates really a lot of the fats that are in the milk that's very different from 100% grass-fed cow. So leave it to say that, again, it's processing is everything. And so for instance, there's a good number of Washington dairies and local producers that actually both make and sell raw milk or very gently processed milk, and their cows are actually treated very well and given a natural diet. And again, you'll get a much better product. Now, I'm speaking primarily of milk. That is milk that you would just drink out of a glass, or pour over your oatmeal or pour over cereal. When it comes to dairy products, I'll come to that because that's another layer of this discussion. But leave it to say that if you have your choice, if you're going to drink milk, you really will do yourself well if you're buying good quality milk. One other detail about that is this whole idea of making low-fat, non-fat, and variations of processed milk, including homogenization. So when they remove the fat from the milk, you are creating an unnatural food, essentially. Milk naturally has fat. If you remove the fat, what you're left with is more sugar and carbohydrates. There's protein in milk too, but anyone who's listened to some of my discussions and is paying attention to nutritional knowledge and research and even popular diets, we know that the carbohydrates and sugar intake is really feeding a lot of the health problems in our current society. And so we have seen, as fat was removed from the diet over the last 20 to 30, 40 years, we see an increase in carbohydrate intake and sugar, and that's led to increased rates of obesity, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, you name it. And milk, by removing the fat, is another one of those practices that in theory sounded good because fat was high in calories, right? So we take the fat out. Well, you leave people deficient, and we don't feel as satisfied when we cut fats out of our diet like that. We end up consuming more, and we're getting a lot more sugar in that milk. The processing itself and how they take that fat out also manipulates the little bit of fat that's left. So for instance, homogenization is where they process the fat that's left within the milk, or even in whole milk. They create a suspension where the fat particles are turned into tiny, tiny particles that then stay suspended throughout the milk. Homogenization means that they keep the fat homogeneous, or it's spread throughout the milk. In other words, you don't get the fat floating to the top, as would happen naturally after you milk the cow. And there is evidence that we absorb fat and use fats in a more unnatural way when it's homogenized. Some of the inflammatory and the fats we don't really want getting into our circulation it's been shown to increase atherosclerosis and increases in damaged fats entering the body when you homogenize the milk. And so, again, if you're choosing milk, you want it as little processed as possible. There's raw milk, there's lightly pasteurized or a lower long duration pasteurization, and non-homogenized or cream top milk is going to be your better bet. Now, with all that said, should adults and even children that have been weaned be drinking cow's milk or any animal's milk? Again, for the reasons of the sugar content, I mentioned that there's some problems there. Another issue is that there are a lot of naturally occurring hormone factors, and there are some unnatural factors that get introduced to the milk that are associated with some issues. For instance, autoimmune diabetes in children, or what we would call type 1 diabetes, one of the more strongly correlated foods associated with the triggering of that disease is cow's milk. It's been even narrowed down to the common strain of milk we use in America, the Holstein cow. There are some inbreeding that goes on, and there's a protein structure within the, I believe it's in the casein protein, that is linked with triggering autoimmune disease against the pancreas and therefore diabetes. Does that happen in every person? Of course not. But in someone that's vulnerable or sensitive to the possibility and who's on a lot of cow's milk, there's a strong correlation there. And then again, because of these growth factors, in milk, there are factors and nutrients that are designed to trigger rapid growth and the development of a newborn animal. And so there are a lot of practical reasons why I don't think most adults just should be drinking milk. Another one is that it tends to develop into allergies for many people when they consume dairy every day, multiple times. There are a number of reasons that could trigger that, but it can cause disruption within the gut, and it can trigger the immune system to be having this allergic sensitivity to milk. Often it's what we call the delayed reaction, and people don't really realize they're having problems with dairy unless we test for it. So that's another reason. Now, when it comes to milk and dairy, there are a number of good things in it in terms of nutrients. So for instance, there's a lot of evidence that the fat content of milk, especially the butter or clarified butter, also known as ghee, is a very healing and therapeutic food. It's very good for cooking with. It's a very stable fat and very much associated with good health, as long as, again, all those processing problems are addressed, so that you, in other words, you're buying butter or clarified butter from cows that had a natural diet. The more golden and kind of yellow that butter is, typically that means those cows were given at least a little bit of wild grazing and some green grass. And that's essentially carotenoids, or things like beta carotene, that fat-soluble nutrients that make their way into the fats, and they're very good for you. Also, butter is high in some shorter fatty acids that are very good for the bowel and good for the health of the body. So anyway, big fan of using butter, and again, clarified butter as long as it's from good animals. Now, when it comes to things like yogurt and cheese and cottage cheese and cream, and some other products that use dairy, it's a very diverse group of category of foods, and there's going to be a lot of differences in terms of people's ability to either get good nourishment from them or can cause allergies. But in general, I'll summarize it to say, when dairy or milk is fermented, say in a natural yogurt or kefir, or aged cheeses like Swiss cheese, and typically the more aged it is, even some of the blue cheese and aged cheddar, you are getting the proteins and one, you're getting all the sugar out of it, and you're kind of pre-digesting and getting some of the allergenicity of the dairy out of it. And so the problem, of course, again, sourcing, you want good quality cheese, good quality yogurt. Most commercial yogurts that you buy over the counter are not fermented very long. There's a lot of milks, there's actual milk left in there, and those remaining sugar, and they just don't, it's not fermented enough to really get the true way yogurt used to be made. Doing it, you're on your own at home, is a great way to get into fermentation. A yogurt should be fermented for about 24 hours, by the way. At least, say, 12 to 24 hours. Most commercial yogurts on the store shelf are for perhaps 5 to 6 hours of fermentation. They use thickeners to make it thick, and of course they sweeten them, so that's not good. Anyway, so as long as you don't have a strong dairy allergy, I think there are some products that many people could enjoy that are from dairy foods, hopefully from good cows, from cows that it's organic, grass-fed as much as possible, and free of those contaminants and things we don't want. So let's see, what else? Oh, one other area to touch on with dairy is that when it comes to low carbohydrate diets, and I talked last week about collagen and some of the proteins that can turn into sugar in the body, we call that gluconeogenesis. The same is true for dairy, in that when we consume certain dairy foods, we can get too much protein sometimes. Dairy also has, especially casein, which is one of the main components of the dairy protein, triggers a high level of release of insulin in the body. When I went through this research, I was a little bit confused by that as to why is it that if you eat cheese or some dairy product that has casein in it and not much sugar or carbohydrate, why would you need the body to release a bunch of insulin? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, I think, that makes sense. One is that, think about where dairy is coming from. It's coming from a cow or an animal that's nursing its young. When that protein enters into the body of the baby or the animal to nourish it, there's the lactose, that's the milk sugar coming with it, and that gets broken up into sugar. And the protein also that's coming in also can be turned into sugar and utilized. And the insulin that's needed to process all that is important for a developing animal. And so that enhanced insulin release helps with growth of the developing baby or child. So what does that mean for us adults? Well, again, studies have shown milk protein and milk triggers a very high insulin release in the body. And, that might be helpful in terms of absorption, utilization of the protein and any sugars you might be consuming. But there's a lot of evidence that a lot of excess insulin in the body does a lot of harm and damage. It's extremely inflammatory and toxic, and it's one of the reasons why people say with type 2 diabetes, where they have insulin resistance and they have high blood sugar and high insulin, have increased health problems. And so it's also depleting, and it tends to burn out your pancreas if you are constantly dumping out lots of insulin. And so that's a long way to say that we still don't fully understand what these implications are. But I think overconsumption of dairy in individuals who have metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance, and I have information about that. I may do more of a discussion on that later. But those folks may want to really minimize and maybe even completely avoid dairy foods. So bear that in mind. And like I said, doing dairy should be something that's done in moderation, for sure, for just about all of us. So let's move on. If there's questions about that, let me know. Again, I love cheese. I love enjoying a good quality yogurt. I use it as kind of an aside to meals, and I try to go through periods of time where I don't eat any dairy. And that leads me to the next topic that I'll wrap up with, and that is vegetarianism and veganism. And so where I'm going to tie that into the dairy foods is to say that when I go on a cleanse and I want to detox, I usually take out dairy, among other foods, for reasons that I just mentioned regarding the problems with dairy. The other reason is that essentially doing a plant-based diet for a detox or for a cleanse, it's a nice change-up. Our bodies really do like to alternate diets and to rotate throughout, say, our year or our seasons. And a detox and cleanse, what we want to do is help ease the digestive burden on your body and sort of the processing through the liver and digestive tract. Get lots of good fiber, and of course plant-based foods are going to be our way to go. And so for me, I'm talking about vegetarianism and veganism from the context of, I think it's the ideal detox diet. Now, what that also means is that I don't think it's the ideal permanent diet for most human beings. If we look at all the data and we kind of look at a lot of the historical evidence and look at studies of prehistoric man and even current humans across this planet, there are very few, and very few of us have in our ancestry any cultures that thrived on a strictly vegetarian, but especially they did not thrive on a vegan diet. A vegan diet is kind of a new concept of a very restrictive kind of parameter. Now, some of us may have the genetic ability, and we've inherited the ability to be able to do well on a long-term vegetarian or vegan diet, but it's not very many of us. And it's very easy to start developing some deficiencies when you're that strict. Again, I don't think eating too much meat and dairy is good. Again, through the cold months, cultures that live very far north, they survived on the fats of animals, including the protein, the fats, and even dairy foods that they probably were able to get or to have from the animals they kept. But it was a seasonal thing. Vegetarianism, and especially veganism, which I'm assuming everyone knows what those terms mean, so I won't really define them, but vegetarianism means that primarily a person does not consume the flesh or animal products that resulted in the animal dying. I guess that's my understanding. So, for instance, some vegetarians will consume dairy. They might consume eggs. And then you've got these variations of it where they're pisco, they'll consume poultry and fish, but not beef. So a lot of variables. But primarily I'm talking about vegetarianism that just doesn't eat animal flesh. So typically that includes, no fish and anything that resulted in the death of the animal versus things like eggs and poultry. So losing focus there. On the other hand, veganism, again, is very much just plant-based. There's no animal products whatsoever. So when I was in college, of course, I went to a very diverse naturopathic university, and there was this clash of many different ideas, but one of them was, do you eat meat? Do you not eat meat? And I'm not going to go into the ethical and environmental concerns that are out there. Also religious, ethically, a lot of people have certain beliefs. I respect those. I'm speaking primarily from my studies and my view of human nutrition and what I think is nutritionally sound. And so you can be a vegan and be pretty healthy if you have a couple of things happening. Number one, you have the right genetics for that. And I will emphasize, the data shows that there's very few people. I don't want to give a percentage. There's a book called, I'll have to put it in the notes later. It's a great read, nutritional book. And I'll put that down in the comments below when I remember and write down that name. But they quote the research and some evidence showing that only as little as 25% or less of the entire world population of individuals probably have the genetic ability to stay on a long-term vegan diet. And it's really an unprecedented diet. There was no cultures that really did that in our genetic past. And so, there's African tribes that were very, very plant-based and still are near the equator. However, you've got tribes that would live off the blood of animals, even though they didn't eat the flesh. You have cultures that ate insects, which are in the animal kingdom. And so there's just a diversity of protein and nutrients that you get when you utilize all of the various food sources. Anyway, so it's very easy on both vegetarian and vegan diets, though, to see some very specific deficiencies in the way people apply the diet to their routine. Number one, I would say, is iron deficiency. There is iron in plants, but it's harder to digest and get it out. Of course, it leads to anemia, and there's fatigue issues that come with that. Another problem, nutrient, would be B12. So vitamin B12 would be one of the most common vitamin deficiencies there are in our kind of modern situation. And in vegan vegetarian diets, it's very common to see deficiencies over time. And now a lot of people don't notice these deficiencies until many, many years along this road. For instance, in the raw foods community, that kind of took off, and I'm not sure if it's still that popular, but a vegan raw foods diet is very, very difficult for our digestive system to be able to extract the nutrition that we need from that. And so B12 primarily is in animal products, and it is in fermented foods to a small degree. But if you are a vegetarian and vegan, you want to look at making sure you're supplementing probably with those foods. So anyway, wrap up here is to say that I believe in a balanced approach. We don't always know what our genetic diet should be. Our bodies are very adaptable, but I think we should do some trial and error based on how we feel and educate ourselves and think about a seasonal rotational diet. So depending on what part of the world you live and the weather and your ancestors and your family of origin, that could dictate a lot of what you're going to thrive better on. So, and some testing can determine what that might be too. So if you do have a tendency for insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, if you're trying to lose weight, if you have hypothyroidism, if you have some kind of other disease or some toxic load, we may do other diets for that sake. So anyway, but I like to take, again, the best of both worlds. I use a vegetarian vegan diet for when I want to detox. And by the way, that's only for, say, a week to up to 3 weeks. And then I'm typically going to start to come off of that. So anyway, there's a lot of great sources of good nutrition from animal products if we're just raising them ethically and treating them well and respectfully. And there's organ meats. There's the dairy foods we could use, and then also the wild fish and game and seafood. And you know, if there's a reason why you want to avoid animal products, I think you just need to be more, make sure you're educated in terms of figuring out some ways to get good protein sources in those specific nutrients, iron and B12 especially. One other would be protein, and vegetarians and vegans, I do see protein deficiencies as well in some cases. So anyway, that's it for now. Probably next time topic's going to be supporting the immune system for the fall and winter as it's upon us. So avoiding the flu, how to get over the flu, how to knock these things down quickly. And we'll probably pick up again always on diet and other aspects of health. So please thumbs up if you enjoyed this video. It was helpful. Give me some questions if you have them, and you can subscribe and hit the links for the other videos available. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.